Welcome to Nothing But the Truth. I'm your host, Trudy Stern. Tonight, we focus on what may be the most consequential foreign policy crisis facing the United States, Iran. Over the last several days, tensions that were already dangerously high have escalated dramatically after a U.S. Apache helicopter was attacked by Iranian drones near the Straits of Hormuz. Thankfully, the crew safely was rescued, and President Donald Trump ordered retaliatory strikes against Iranian military targets. Iran responded with additional attacks, and what had been fragile negotiations over a potential agreement now appear to be hanging by a thread. The questions are enormous. Are we witnessing the final collapse of diplomacy with Iran? Are we on the verge of a wider regional war? What are America's objectives? What is Iran trying to achieve? And perhaps most importantly, how does all this end? To help us make sense of these rapidly developing events, we are joined by our resident expert, Jonathan Schanzer. Jonathan is executive director of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and a leading authority on Iran, terrorism financing, Middle East security, and the U.S. national security policy. He is the author of multiple books on the Middle East and one of the most respected voices in Washington on the Iranian regime and the threats it poses to the United States and our allies. We are so happy to be joined by Jonathan to explain where the conflict stands, whether the United States is moving closer to direct war with Iran, what options remain for diplomacy, and what Americans should be watching in the days ahead. And of course, how Israel plays into this picture. Welcome back, Jonathan. So happy to have you. We really need your clarity at this moment.
Thanks, Trudy. Good to be with you.
Okay, so walk us through where we are and what is going on.
Okay, I think the first thing that we all need to understand is that we have been watching paint dry almost. If it wasn't so scary, it would be boring. I've been calling this the ceasefire war, right? Because, we keep seeing the Iranians not abide by the ceasefire that Donald Trump has tried to cobble together. They continue to engage in violence across the region, attacking our Gulf allies and occasionally U.S. service members. And so we've not had calm, but we've not had war either. We're sort of somewhere in between. We're in this sort of gray area, and it's been going on now for like more than 2 months, which is a remarkable amount of time for this to happen. Now, the story really begins, the current crisis begins over the weekend. And it's actually not even, has nothing to do with the Strait of Hormuz. It has nothing to do with the battle between Iran and the United States. It actually begins with Lebanon. Hezbollah, Iran's most powerful proxy that's based in Lebanon, is firing at Israel drones and rockets, and the Israelis say they've had enough, and they start bombing Hezbollah. Then the Iranians say, you can't bomb Hezbollah. It's a ceasefire, which of course they're trying to extend their influence far beyond their own borders. And the Israelis basically say, that's not a thing. You can't tell us what to do. The Iranians start bombing the Israelis with ballistic missiles. The Israelis begin to scramble their jets. They put refueling planes up in the air. They're ready to go. Donald Trump tries to tell Bibi to stand down. Bibi gets on the phone with him. We don't know what happens, whether it was Netanyahu defying the United States or the US and Israel agreeing on a path forward, but the Israelis start giving it to the Islamic Republic, and it worked because the Islamic Republic shortly thereafter says, well, we consider this matter closed. And it looked like things were going to, maybe go back to that kind of weird in-between place of that ceasefire that isn't. But then we have the downing of this chopper. Now, it looks like it was an Iranian drone that hit the chopper. Thankfully, the two service members were not harmed. And in an amazing rescue, we actually sent a maritime drone and like a water drone that went and picked up like an autonomous vehicle of sorts, probably directed by someone, probably back in Florida, but get them out of harm's way. And but of course, then the U.S. has to respond. And We have. And now what we have is this escalation. Now, if you listen to Donald Trump, he's saying that he has to strike hard, but he also is trying to message very carefully to the Islamic Republic that he wants all of this to be proportionate, that, he has to do something to get them to understand that this is serious, but he also doesn't want things to just spiral out of control. The primary reason for that is that I think the president doesn't want to put more troops in harm's way. He doesn't want to get caught in a quagmire in the Middle East. So, what he's trying to do, and this is a really difficult thing for the president, he wants to send a really tough message and to really, impress upon the Iranians that there is no winning this. And in fact, they only have things to lose, while simultaneously not engaging in a long and painful conflict that Americans would probably disapprove of. So the president's in a very narrow lane here, and that's why this is, in my view, a very fascinating moment to watch.
He's in a narrow lane, but it's clear that the Iranians are really stoking the tiger, as they say, in terms of what happened with the Apache helicopter. So I have two questions on that. Why would Iran do that if we're in the midst of negotiations and their economy is collapsed? Why would they do that and not continue with the negotiations? And then secondly, why would President Trump think that they would even abide by any of the negotiations? They're obviously not trustworthy. In the middle of the negotiations, they're firing on an Apache warplane.
Well, I think your second question is really the poignant one, which is what are we trying to do here? Right? I mean, if you ask me, our goal should be the complete obliteration of the Islamic Republic. We should just bring down this regime, and say it out loud, because actually that gives us leverage. That will make them more fearful of us. And by the way, it's the right objective to have. There is no working with this regime. There is nothing that they will sign that I can trust, that any of us can trust. And I think that that is really the crux here for the president. Does he decide to finally just drop the gloves and say, we're going to bring these guys down once and for all? We're going to say it to the American public. He's not wanted to do it. Regime change is kind of a dirty term in Washington. We don't talk about that after the disasters in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it is the right thing to do here. And look, I will say that there is still a strategy of bringing down the regime that doesn't require us to bomb them back into the Stone Age. We have this economic siege that we have placed on the Islamic Republic. They are unable to export oil. They're losing tens, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars a day. They could lose billions if we force them to cap their wells and they're unable to extract oil from the ground any longer. There is a lot more that can happen with a slow moving sort of strangulation campaign, as opposed to some of the stuff that I think that Donald Trump is considering right now, which would include going after some of their energy infrastructure and destroying it permanently, attacking bridges or power stations. These are the sorts of things now that Donald Trump is doing. But, in answer to your question as to why the Islamic Republic would continue doing this, even though it is extremely hazardous to their health, if they actually quit this war and they surrender, well, then they're no longer the Islamic Republic. I mean, it's in their DNA. This regime is to wage war against the United States and Israel. It is in their DNA to call for jihad and revolution and violence against the US and Israel. And if they stop and they agree to just stand down, well, then what is it that they stand for? Who are they at the end of the day? They just start to look like any other country. And if that's the case, it's time for elections, it's time for new leadership, and it's time for people that can actually bring prosperity and good governance to Iran. So I think that they understand that it's either it's war that they somehow survive, or it's surrender and they don't survive. And so I think they picked the lesser of two evils. And the amazing thing here is that Donald Trump has finally done something that no president has. He's actually put them to that choice. And that, I think, is where the president deserves immense credit. The execution of this right now is, it's a bit muddled, and I think the president is having a hard time figuring out what to do next because the options are not great in either direction. But if you ask me, like I said, keep squeezing them, keep strangling them. I do believe that the economic thing that is in play right now, this what they call economic fury, can have a really devastating effect on the regime.
So President Trump seems to have a lot of confidence, and he's posting on and telegraphing his future hits, and he's posting on Truth Social that he wants to assume total control of oil producing infrastructure, like they did in like we've done in Venezuela, and that is working brilliantly. Do you see that as a possibility here?
Well, I think the devil's in the details here, Trudy. I mean, we haven't seen an execution of kind of a plan like that. The idea of gaining control versus destroying is, I think that's kind of the thing that I would look for right now. Bombing it and just destroying it, that doesn't leave much for the Iranian people if and when this war concludes, right? Finding a way of seizing it and not giving the enemy an opportunity to sell oil, to benefit from it, and to finance their war machine. Well, that would be, I think, really interesting, but it could put boots on the ground. What I'm hoping for, as I hear things like that, is that maybe the CIA and the Pentagon have given the president a plan that he feels confident in executing. That maybe they have found a way to do exactly as he describes without putting a lot of risk into the equation. If that is what we've found, then that's great news because I think if I've been reading it right, the president has not been happy with the military options that his advisors have been giving him. And it's for that reason that we continue to say we want a deal and we're not striking them. And now he's saying, oh, well, I have a plan and here's what I'm going to do. This could be a change in tact, a change in strategy on the part of the president that I think would portend greater clarity and potentially really good news.
Do you think that the attack on the Apache helicopter allowed President Trump to understand that he's negotiating with very untrustworthy people, and that I have seen it that he has changed his tune, just as you have just said, but that he really doesn't feel that it's possible even to negotiate with them?
Well, I mean, I will say there was, we were talking about the Lebanon incident. And it was really interesting because if you saw after the Iranians, they fire, I think it was 11 ballistic missiles at Israel, right? These are missiles the size of a bus with hundreds of pounds of explosives in the warhead, right? Can do immense damage. The Israelis shot them out of the sky, but that wasn't really the point. The point was is that Iran attacked. And the Israelis, when Trump said, you got to stand down, you've done enough damage, we're not doing this thing anymore. And the Israelis basically said, no, that's not how this works. It's the Middle East. And you have to respond. Or the message is, yeah, you can hit us again, or you can hit anybody in the region again, and there will be no price to pay. And, that was essentially the crux of the discussion or even argument between Trump and Netanyahu. But once the US was hit, became pretty clear the president said, I have to respond, right? And so when you compare these two moments, the president was initially saying, yeah, we don't want escalation. And then when the US was hit, it was, oh, okay, we need an escalation here. I think those two moments have clarified things for the president. I think he understands that the Middle East, they play by different rules over there. Being the patient one, being the more reasonable one, does not necessarily buy you calm or peace. And I think if that's the lesson that he took away, look, he's been climbing a learning curve here. This is not a typical wartime president. He did not, I mean, we had the war against ISIS in his first term, but that was really it. This was a major policy decision by the president, and now he's getting to see what it's like up close and personal, firsthand, working with the Islamic Republic and how nasty this regime is. And I think he's learning in real time. And I'm not unhappy with what I see. I think he's trying to be judicious. He's trying not to spend down munitions. He's not trying to put Americans in harm's way, but he also understands that you cannot soft pedal things with this nasty regime.
Let's talk about Israel for a second. Israel has offered to join into this fray and help America. It seems like President Trump is not okay with that, not interested. Why? What has happened here that would change the equation?
I think the Israelis want to just keep going and they want to bring down the regime. And I think they're willing to just drop as much munitions as they possibly can in order to weaken the regime as much as possible. I think that Donald Trump probably understands that at the end of the day, the Israelis are not the primary here. By the way, he said it out loud. He says, I'm calling the shots. I'm the senior partner here. And he is, right? He's the president of the United States, the most powerful country in the world. And at the end of the day, if the regime is challenging the U.S. over his demands, it's not an Israeli thing. They can help. And I do think it's a force multiplier. If we're doing 500 attacks a day and the Israelis can add another 300, it seems like a good thing to me, right? But, the president maybe needs to have the United States people understand that this is his war. It's not a war with Israel. It's the America's war. I actually think there's something very positive about this. That this is, and we've all heard this, that, oh, the president is waging this war on behalf of Israel, as if tiny Israel has the ability to tell the president, the most powerful man in the world, what to do. I think I think he liked the idea of showing the world, hey, this is what a really good ally does. They fly wing to wing with us, and we vanquish our enemies together. And they did that. Like they won that round. There was no question about it. But the president is now in a different battle. This is a battle over the Strait of Hormuz, and it's a battle about getting the Iranian regime to capitulate on its nukes. And the Israelis can help by bombing further, but the dynamic really at its essence is one between the U.S. and Iran. I think if the Iranians hit Israel again, Israel has every right to fire back, and it will. But I do think that this is now kind of a slugfest between the Islamic Republic and Donald Trump, and I am cheering for the president. I want to see him prevail here. I want to see him put the Iranian regime back in its place. This is a third-rate country, or a third-rate regime, rather, because the people of Iran are great. It's this regime that is just, I mean, it is not worth, it's just, it's bottom of the barrel here. And I think we need to show the world that this is a country that can and will be defeated.
So that is so fantastic to hear because I have heard a lot of people and read a lot of articles about uh, trying to build a wedge between the United States and Israel, and that this is further evidence of that, that Donald Trump doesn't want to have Israel involved, and that Bibi and the president have had some sort of fight or argument. So I'm so happy to hear this other perspective. It's so
Well,
positive.
but let me just say, it's not that Israel is super popular here in the United States. I mean, you got a Democrat Party that is just a disaster on Israel right now. I mean, you got a guy that just won a primary, flaunting a Nazi tattoo. I mean, this should probably give you some sense of what's going on here in this country as it relates to Jews and the Jewish state. And in the Republican Party, there's still, the Tucker Carlson wing, which is hugely problematic as well. And then on top of that, the war itself has not been particularly popular, and people do associate Israel with the war. So I don't want to tell you that things are great here. What I would say though is that I don't think that Israel is crucial in this moment right now. The US can handle this on its own. And if it says that it wants to do that, I think there's nothing wrong with it. Are things perfect between Trump and Netanyahu? Probably not, but I would say it doesn't mean that this isn't a solid alliance. I think the Israelis did everything that Trump had asked them to do. I do think that what we've reached right now is a point where maybe interests diverge a little bit. And that's not a personal thing, and it's not a sign of like a fraying alliance. It just means that the US is trying to solve for the Strait of Hormuz crisis specifically, and it has core demands about the nukes and maybe the missiles. The Israelis want to see the complete, downfall of this regime. And those are different objectives. And if you're on the same side fighting for different objectives, that's where friction come in. And it's for that reason that I'm not unhappy that you might see a pause in Israeli involvement. And if it comes to pass that the president says, you know what, regime change is now my goal, my guess is that Israel gets right back in there again because interests will be fully aligned and there's no reason not to fight together.
So the entities that Trump is speaking to in Iran, who is that? Now there's no intermediaries anymore. He's speaking directly to top leaders in Iran. Who are they?
Look, I don't know. I don't think the president has said so. But what's really interesting is just, after the Israeli round of strikes the other day, like Sunday night, Monday morning, whatever that was, um, there were reports that Ahmed Vahidi from the IRGC was possibly killed. There were reports that Mujtaba Khamenei, the supreme leader, the son of the last supreme leader, also may have been taken off the board. I don't have any inkling right now as to whether any of that is real. But then on top of that, there's this Abbas Araghchi, who's the foreign minister. There's Masoud Pezeshkian, the president, who looks a lot weaker than he did before. There's a guy representing the judiciary. There's kind of what my colleagues have taken to call this rump of the regime, right? You've got this reduction of a lot of the top leaders. They've been thinned out, and whoever's left right now is under severe strain. And I don't know who the president's talking to. My hope is that it's somebody that is maybe a little bit more of a pragmatist. I know he's been angling for something like a Delcy Rodriguez type of scenario that could come out of this war, that you find a pragmatist who's willing to essentially surrender, but still keep some semblance of a regime in place, and that is bending to the will of the United States. Look, I have questions about whether that's even possible with an ideological regime like this. But I think we're going to find out in the days and weeks to come. I get a sense that this regime is a lot weaker than it's letting on. I think our economic campaign is working. I think our military campaign did work already. They're thinned out and they're weaker, and I think their knees are starting to give. So we need to keep at it. The one thing that I'll just say, kind of in the interest of time here, is, wars don't exactly work on anybody's timeline, right? I mean, I think there is this sense that when America goes to war, it all should just be wrapped up neatly because we have superior firepower. We're the big dog on the block, and therefore, the other side should just surrender. We've not had a surrender to the United States, like a formal surrender to the US, since 1945 with Japan. Countries just don't say we give up any longer. We're in a very different period of warfare. And also with countries like Iran, as ideological as they are, they're not going to give up. They're not just going to say that's it. Sometimes you need to slug it out a bit. And I think we're not in a bad place. I think, the toll for us in terms of cost and in terms of, our men and women in uniform, it's been relatively low. I mean, we don't want to waste American taxpayer dollars, and we certainly don't want to see the blood of Americans spilled. But right now, I think patience is on our side. We can wear these, they're weak and they're getting weaker. And if we can just stick to a strategy here of ultimately bringing them to their knees and then flat on their back, that's the goal. And I think we're on our way. Americans just need to be patient. The timing's not great because of midterms. And, I think people are grumpy about, higher gas prices as we head into the summer months for vacations and July 4th and all of that. But war's messy. These are the unintended consequences of war. It's a just war. We are attacking an enemy that has been attacking us since 1979. Terrorist attacks and all sorts of mayhem across the region. This was the right war to fight, in my view, but we just need to be smart and patient.
It seems so unfortunate that President Trump has to weigh the midterm elections in his calculations. It's almost
Yeah,
like taking the focus away from, something that's really needs to have a direct focus, because it seems like if we do not take out this regime, then we're really just back where we started. And it's almost even worse because
yeah.
other Gulf states would view Iran now as super powerful and
That's
America
right.
as unreliable.
That's right. And we cannot be seen as mowing the lawn. We lost in Iraq and Afghanistan. That was not a good look for us. And it really, I think, caused a lot of countries in the region to doubt us. I think that's right. And it is unfortunate that we've got the midterms coming up. Although I think the president appears to be heading into this with more strength than anybody expected. I think at one point, I think he was writing off the House. And now it sort of looks like a toss-up, according to some of the polls that I've seen. The Senate is still, maybe not a lock, but, I think seems more solid. But the guy's got better chances of actually retaining the House and the Senate after these midterms, which is, not what I had on my bingo card. And so I think he has greater leverage than maybe he thought he would. I also think that the man's thinking about something different than just, am I holding on to some political power for the next 2 years? I think he's thinking about his presidential legacy, and I think that that's not insignificant here either.
That would be really incredible if that is true. It seems like this is a strategic opportunity to reset the Middle East for years to come, and that the Abraham Accords would then soon follow. With Iran defeated, lastly, because I know your time is sensitive, how do you see that picture, the picture of global politics in the region if Iran is defeated?
Look, if Iran is defeated, it's a debilitating blow, obviously, to jihadists and extremists all around the region. I would be worried about Turkey rising up in its place. That's a country we can talk about maybe on a future episode. But I would say that the big picture here is that China loses, Russia loses, America wins, Israel wins, the Gulf states have more stability. These oil producing countries will have much more faith in the US. These are all really positive outcomes, and this happens with a victory. I would also argue that Israel's standing here in the United States probably improves. You probably see a reduction in anti-Semitism as well. It's a win, right? And that would be, I think, really the sort of John Grisham ending here, like the novel that ends perfectly on the last page. That's what you're looking for. And so, there's a lot riding on this. And again, I think that's exactly what Donald Trump understands. The question is, can he be patient? Can the American people be patient? That's what we're looking for.
Wow. Thank you so much for all of your analysis, for your wisdom. Thank you for always coming back and helping us understand these critical moments and seeing what's at stake and what we should be watching for in the years and days ahead. As the events continue to unfold, one thing is definitely clear, that the decisions being made right now have enormous consequences for the United States, Israel, and the future of the Middle East. So, Jonathan, thank you so, so much for coming on.
My pleasure. Anytime.
To our listeners, thank you for joining us. You can catch Nothing But the Truth every Thursday at 9:30 p.m. And if you missed any part of tonight's program, you can find Nothing But the Truth wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, stay strong, stay informed, and keep seeking nothing but the truth.